Well, it's December the 11th, and we're doing a little bit of an update here on what's been happening on the election. As it seems like this has been the ongoing topic, it seems to never end. Um, the big issue, of course, is the Texas lawsuit now, I guess. There are other lawsuits out there. I think that Sidney Powell still has filed some appeals in federal appellate court and so forth, but it looks like none of these suits are really gaining any traction. And of course, the big one is after the Supreme Court rejected the emergency injunction on the Pennsylvania case, they immediately got presented with this Texas lawsuit, which has now been joined by, I think the count is 17 additional states. If I remember that, I don't know if anybody's joined lately or not, but I think that's about it. And and of course the president himself. So, and the Supreme Court apparently is in the process of considering whether or not to hear this case. And and I guess there's the opposing states which are defending it. Ironically enough, even Georgia, the Attorney General is opposing this effort, which is interesting. But also, of course, the Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, I think, are opposing it also. So here we are. So I guess the big question is, what will the Supreme Court do with all this stuff? It's a rather big picture case because it involves 62 electors, and if the Supreme Court were to hear the case and decide in favor of the plaintiffs, they would be essentially throwing out the Biden electoral victory. They would not be giving it to Trump directly either. And of course, then we would have to get into what would happen in that outcome. Basically, the most likely thing that would happen, given the fact that to date, the legislatures have not been able to do much of anything on it, and I never expected they would if you've been following my videos all along. That's been my idea. I just can't imagine they're going to do that. And so far, we've seen failures in about every major legislature to do anything. So I think the strategy is to throw it into the House of Representatives, where if everybody votes more or less per party, the Republicans would win. And also the Senate, where the Republicans would still win. Because even regardless of the outcome in Georgia, the Republicans would at least have 50 senators. And assuming everybody voted party line on sides, the Pence could break the tie and would then be able to get himself and his vice president. So that seems to be the plan. And the question is, would the Supreme Court really do something like that? There's also a question, is it constitutional? So I guess the first thing is, of course, is standing. The Supreme Court would have to decide whether or not these states, Texas and these other states, and the president have standing to bring the case. And I guess the president himself would have, because it directly affects him. And so joining it, that kind of gives the case standing, I guess, I would think. The other issue is, what is the lay of the land inside the Supreme Court? And I addressed this in my last video. My quick background on the Supreme Court rules of engagement, as I understand it. 4 justices can decide to hear a case. So it doesn't take a majority to hear a case. It takes 5 to decide one favorably to the plaintiff, So 5 or more decide the case, but 4 can decide whether it gets on the docket and gets heard. So I think there is a possibility here that there's 4 justices that are for doing something like this and 5 that might be basically against it. And that may be the lay of the land we're in here. Or maybe not. It's also possible because the dispute between states principle gives the Supreme Court first jurisdiction rather than the appellate courts. They're kind of stuck to actually at least address the case and decide whether or not to hear it or to reject it, in a way that if it was some other sort of case, they could simply refer it down to a lower court and not make any decision at all. So that's kind of where we are at this. And of course, the question is, of course, right now, I think the mass public has been convinced that Joe Biden is going to be the next president, and it's already been decided. The electors have been certified and chosen as of this moment. They're ready to vote on Monday, the 14th. So what happens if the Supreme Court makes a interesting decision to actually throw the whole thing out? That's going to be a bit of a shock to the system, I believe, because I don't think in general, except for the most loyal and enthusiastic Trump supporters, I don't think it's really expected. I don't even know if they really believe it, but they're hopeful. But but if it did happen, then you have an interesting situation in the country. So the options they have is basically to reject the case outright. I guess they could still argue there isn't standing or something, even though I think the president being involved would kind of give it standing. They could actually argue that they don't have sufficient evidence to make a decision like that. They could decide they could use this principle that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court called the latches or whatever. I don't know the legal jargon for that, where it comes from. But essentially the idea is that your time is up. You didn't file it in time, which is kind of an interesting point of view. If you'd filed it earlier, you would have no case to bring. And if you file it now, it's too late to make a decision, one of those kind of things. And then another interesting possibility would be to decide the case in favor of the plaintiffs on the merit, but to say something to the effect that again, using it, it's kind of too late to change the outcome in this election, and simply not order that the electors be decertified. In other words, they've already been certified to vote. They could decide that the decisions that were made to change the election law without the legislature were unconstitutional. And that might very well affect the Georgia Senate races, if you see what I'm saying, for things going forward. But to say that as far as the presidential race of November the 3rd, that it's kind of too late to make a decision of that sort because there isn't a fair remedy to be had. I mean, the fairest remedy would be obviously to revote. I mean, if we had time, that would be the fairest thing to do. It would be to throw it out and revote under new rules that are passed by the legislature, or the ones that already were in place by the legislature, and revote, and then you would have a fair election. I mean, for instance, that was what was done in the congressional race back in 2018, where there was vote harvesting in the state of North Carolina. So in a Senate or congressional race, that would certainly be an option. But for a presidential race, we need to have a president on January the 20th, and we don't really want it to be Nancy Pelosi, do we? We have to consider that there are worse outcomes, and then there are even more worse outcomes, you might say. So, given that situation, I think that you can see why they might come to that. Or the ultimate decision is they might decide that in favor of the plaintiffs and actually decertify the electors, which would throw it into Congress. And that would probably lead to a Trump-Pence victory. I mean, you could always have a dissenting Republican or two in the House, but it might not be enough to actually give it to Joe Biden. With the Republicans would be in a bit of a jam. I mean, they either have to pretty much vote for Biden, or they'd have to vote for Trump, both of which would create certain complications. They could also vote for the Libertarian. Well, actually not, because the Libertarian got no electoral votes, so I guess not. So actually, that's the only two choices they'd have. And so they probably would end up voting for Trump, I would assume. And the Senate, where it'd be a closer, it depends on the outcome of the Georgia election at that time. However, I believe that until the actual election in Georgia was certified, which probably wouldn't be by the 6th, Loeffner would still be the senator until the whoever wins that election, either herself or Warnock, were certified. So she'd still be in there to vote. And at 50, so even if we had a problem with somebody, let's say, I don't know, Romney, but would Romney really want to make Kamala Harris vice president? I mean, maybe, but I don't know. I have a feeling that Pence would win in the Senate because he could, So anyway, that's the way I kind of see it right now. Personally, I can't believe they're going to overturn it. That's just my sixth sense. I mean, but you never know. Supreme Court makes some wild decisions from time to time, and It often doesn't, but we'll have to see. So that's what we're really waiting for today. I guess that's the next big thing on the agenda as I see it. Trump is all in on it, and that's about that. So anyway, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, then you can click the bell to make sure you get notified, and and you can always forward these to other people. So that'll be it for today.